Every government on Earth owes money. Trillions. And that number keeps growing. Year after year. Decade after decade. You've probably heard people say this can't last. That eventually someone has to pay it all back. That we're passing the bill to our kids. But here's what almost no one tells you. The debt doesn't need to be paid back. Not in the way you think. And the system was never designed for that to happen. In fact, trying to pay it all back would likely cause an economic collapse. This isn't a glitch. This is how modern money works. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start with a number. The United States national debt is over $33 trillion. That's trillion with a T. A number so large it stops meaning anything to most people. But here's the strange part. In 1950, the US debt was about $250 billion. By 2000, it was $5 trillion. Now, it's $33 trillion. The debt has grown every single decade. Through wars and peace, recessions and booms, Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, it just keeps climbing. And yet, the economy didn't collapse. Interest still gets paid. Bonds still get issued. Life goes on. So either every government for the past 70 years has been reckless and stupid, or something else is going on. Spoiler, it's something else. To understand why debt can grow forever, you need to understand what government debt actually is. Most people imagine it like household debt. You borrow money, you owe it back. Eventually, you pay it off or you go bankrupt. But governments aren't households. When a government borrows, it issues bonds. Treasury bonds in the US, gilts in the UK. Someone buys that bond, the government gets cash now, it promises to pay interest and return the principal later. But here's the key thing. When that bond matures, the government doesn't pay it back with tax revenue. It just issues a new bond. It borrows again to pay off the old bond. This is called rolling over the debt. And it happens constantly. Every week, billions in bonds mature. Billions in new bonds get issued. The debt gets refinanced, not repaid. This sounds insane if you think like a household, paying off your credit card with another credit card forever. But it works for governments because of one critical difference. Governments, in theory, live forever. You and I will die. Our loans need to be settled, but a government has no expiration date. As long as people believe the government will exist tomorrow and keep paying interest, the debt can just roll forward. Indefinitely. Now you might be thinking, okay, but what about the interest? Doesn't that add up? Yes. But here's where it gets strange. The interest gets paid with new borrowing too. In other words, governments borrow to pay the interest on the borrowing. Let that sit for a second. It's a loop. Debt finances debt. And it only works as long as people keep buying the bonds. Which brings us to the uncomfortable question, why do people keep buying? Because they trust the government will pay them back. Not by eliminating the debt, but by continuing the cycle. As long as bond buyers believe the next bond will also find a buyer, the system holds. It's a chain of belief. Confidence in continuity. Not confidence in repayment. Confidence in perpetual refinancing. This is where things start to feel fragile. Now zoom out. If the debt never gets paid back, does it even matter how big it gets? The answer is, it depends. What matters isn't the absolute size of the debt, it's the size relative to the economy. This is called the debt to GDP ratio. If your economy grows faster than your debt, the debt becomes easier to manage over time. Your income rises. The debt, even if larger in dollars, shrinks as a percentage of what you earn. Think of it like this.
If you owe $10,000 and earn $20,000 a year, that's a 50% debt-to-income ratio. But if your income doubles to $40,000 and your debt stays at $10,000, it's now only 25%. The debt didn't shrink, but it became less of a burden. Governments rely on this. They don't need to pay off the debt, they just need the economy to grow. If GDP rises, the debt-to-GDP ratio can fall even while the debt itself climbs. This actually happened after World War II.
The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio peaked at about 119% in 1946. Massive. But the government didn't pay it down. Instead, the economy boomed. GDP grew. Inflation eroded the real value of the debt. By 1970, the ratio had dropped to around 35%. Not because the debt was repaid, but because the economy outgrew it. This is the dream scenario. Growth solves everything. But there's a catch. What if growth slows? What if the economy stagnates? Or worse, shrinks? Then the debt-to-GDP ratio rises, even if you stop borrowing. And that's when the loop starts to tighten. Here's the math no one wants to say out loud. If your debt grows faster than your economy, and you're paying interest on that debt, eventually the interest payments start consuming more and more of your budget. Right now, the US spends hundreds of billions a year just on interest, not paying down the debt, just servicing it. That money doesn't go to schools, infrastructure, healthcare. It goes to bondholders. And if interest rates rise, those payments explode. In a low interest rate environment, governments can borrow cheaply, roll over debt without much pain. But when rates go up, the cost of refinancing skyrockets. Imagine your mortgage rate doubling. Same house, same loan, twice the monthly payment. Now imagine that on a national scale. This is why central banks have kept rates so low for so long, not just to stimulate growth, but to keep the debt affordable. It's a delicate balance. Too much debt becomes a trap. You can't raise rates without crushing your own budget. But keeping rates low forever creates other problems: bubbles, inflation, risky behavior. And this is where the system reveals its deepest irony. Governments need growth to manage debt, but debt-fueled spending is often what drives growth in the first place. It's circular. Borrow to grow to afford borrowing. As long as it works beautifully. But the moment confidence cracks, the whole thing can unravel fast. Let's talk about what happens when the loop breaks. There are really only a few ways out of a debt spiral. 1. Grow your way out. Boom times, rising GDP, debt becomes manageable again. 2. Inflate your way out. Print money. Let inflation erode the real value of what you owe. Your debt stays the same in dollar terms, but those dollars buy less. Creditors lose, debtors win. 3. Default. Just stop paying. Declare bankruptcy. Start over. Most governments will never formally default on debt in their own currency. They'll choose inflation first, because they control the printing press. But inflation is a hidden default. You technically pay back the bond, just with money that's worth less. This happened throughout history. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. Runaway inflation to escape debt. It destroys savings, collapses trust, but it does reduce the debt burden. And here's the thing. Most major economies are now in a position where option 1, growing out of debt, is getting harder. Aging populations, slower productivity growth, environmental limits. Growth isn't guaranteed anymore, which means option 2, inflation, starts looking more likely. Not hyperinflation, but persistent, elevated inflation. Enough to chip away at debt over time. You're already seeing it. Central banks printed trillions during the pandemic. Debt exploded. And then inflation spiked. Or the system working exactly as designed? Now here's the truly uncomfortable part. The same logic that applies to government debt applies to private debt. corporate debt, household debt, student loans, mortgages. The entire economy runs on rolling debt forward. Businesses don't pay off their bonds, they refinance. Consumers don't pay off credit cards in full. They make minimum payments and keep borrowing. Everyone's playing the same game. And the game only works if everyone keeps playing. If debt stops growing, money stops flowing. If money stops flowing, the economy contracts. This is why politicians never seriously talk about paying down the debt. Because actually doing it would require massive spending cuts or tax hikes. Either one would slow the economy, which would make the debt harder to manage, which would require more cuts. It's a doom loop in reverse. So instead, they just keep borrowing. And as long as bond markets stay calm, it continues. But bond markets are made of people, and people are made of belief. Belief that the system holds. Belief that growth returns. Belief that inflation stays controlled. The moment that belief wavers, interest rates spike. Borrowing costs explode. The debt becomes unsustainable. And then governments face a choice. Print money and risk inflation, or cut spending and risk collapse. Neither is good. This is the knife edge modern economies walk. Not because of bad policy, but because of the architecture of the system itself. So let's return to the original question. Why can debt grow forever without anyone paying it back? Because the system isn't built on repayment, it's built on trust. Trust that tomorrow looks like today. Trust that someone will buy the next bond. Trust that growth, however slow, continues. As long as that trust holds, the debt can grow indefinitely. Not because it's risk-free, but because the alternative, sudden repayment, is worse. The economy would seize. Money would vanish. Everything would break. So we don't pay it back. We roll it forward and hope the music doesn't stop. But here's the final twist. The music always stops eventually. Not because the system is designed to fail, but because infinite growth on a finite planet is a mathematical impossibility. At some point, something gives. Maybe it's inflation, maybe it's default, maybe it's a redesign of money itself. We don't know when, we don't know how, but we do know this. The debt will keep growing. Until it can't. And the question isn't whether that moment comes. The question is, who's holding the bonds when it does?